Welcome dear students. Till up to we studied the development of ovary. Today we are going to discuss the next content, that is the menstrual cycle. We are still in second chapter, reproduction in lower and higher animals, part 10th. 10th part, that is menstrual cycle. What is the menstrual cycle? It is a series of cyclic changes which occurs per month only in female human being, in female sex, and it is the characteristic feature of the primates. It is found in primate animals. Who are the primates? Primates are the placental mammals. Placenta, the mammals having the placenta in future lecture I will explain what is the placenta. It is the intimate connection between the mother and the fetus, through which it is a reddish brown colored disc, okay, and it is the connection between the mother and the fetus through which oxygen, nutrients, hormones, antibodies are provided to the fetus, as well as metabolic waste, carbon dioxide, urea produced by the fetus is transported through this placenta. It is the very most temporary organ during the pregnancy condition, okay, and the mammals which possess this placenta are known as placental mammals, okay, and the primate are the mammals which possess the placenta, okay. Primate, these are belonging to the class mammalia. We know the characteristic of the mammalia, already studied in 11th standard, class mammalia, that is presence of mammary glands in case of female sex. Menstrual cycle is the characteristic feature of the primates including human being. These are the photographs of the primates including human being: gorilla, chimpanzee, orangutan, monkeys, okay. Now here are some photographs of the primates: tarsier, loris, lemur, spider monkey, langur, macaques, mandrill and baboons. All these are the primates. Another primate example, gibbon. See here the photograph. He enjoying for the swinging from one tree to another tree. Gibbons, orangutan, gorilla. We know all the picture about the King Kong, a famous hero, that is gorilla, okay. Chimpanzee, intelligent mammal. All these are the examples of the primates, and the menstrual cycle is the characteristic feature of the primates. Note down in your notebook. Menstrual cycle is the characteristic feature of the primates and the examples of the primates. Why the menstrual cycle is essentially in female human being? Is it necessary? Yes, of course it is necessary for the formation of oocyte. See here, answer, for the production of oocyte. Already we studied in the development of ovary, okay, what are the oocytes, and the preparation of the uterus for the pregnancy, okay. Two answer, that is production of oocytes and the preparation of the uterus for the pregnancy. Now in the next slides we see how the menstrual cycle play an important role in oocyte production and pregnancy. See here. Next page. Site of the menstrual cycle. Where menstrual cycle takes place in female human being? It takes place in ovary and uterus. Both these are the reproductive organs, okay. Ovaries and uterus of the female reproductive tract. Site of the menstrual cycle: ovaries and uterus of the female reproductive tract. See in the diagram. We already studied the female reproductive system. Position of the ovary and uterus. Ovary and uterus, where the menstrual cycle takes place. Regulation of the menstrual cycle. Which factor helps in the regulation of menstrual cycle? Answer: hormones. These hormones are secreted from the pituitary gland and ovaries. 2 hormones from the pituitary gland and 2 hormones from the ovary. These 4 hormones regulate the menstrual cycle. Which are these? From the pituitary gland, gonadotrophin hormones. Gonadotropins or gonadotrophic hormones, okay. See here, gonadotropins, FSH, long form, follicular stimulating hormone. The name indicates that it stimulates the follicular development in the ovary. Okay, but it is also carried out the functional role in male also. Follicular stimulating hormone. LH, luteinizing hormone. Ovarian hormones, two hormones secreted from the ovary, estrogen and progesterone. Both these are known as female sex hormones, and both these hormones play an important role in menstrual cycle. They maintain the thickness of the endometrium of the uterus. We already studied uterus have three walls: outer perimetrium, middle myometrium, inner endometrium, and the thickness of endometrium is maintained by these ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone. We already studied estrogen play an important role in development of secondary sexual characters in female. See in the diagram, from which part gonadotropins secreted? They are secreted from the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland having two parts, anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary, and they are secreted from anterior pituitary. Where pituitary gland is present? It is present on the ventral wall of the brain. Okay, hypothalamus, they attach to the hypothalamus. This word you must heard in the topic nervous coordination. Okay, they are secreted from the anterior pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is the smallest endocrine gland, P-shaped gland. Where it is present? It is present on the ventral wall of the brain. Ovarian hormones, estrogen, progesterone, they are secreted from the ovary, no doubt, but from which part? Ovarian follicles. We know the primary follicle, secondary follicle, mature follicle, primary, secondary follicles, mature follicles. These ovarian follicles secrete the estrogen and progesterone. This progesterone hormone, interesting, one more interesting note about the progesterone, it is known as the gestation hormone, pregnancy hormone. Why it is known as gestation hormone or the pregnancy hormone? Because it maintains pregnancy. It plays an important role during pregnancy. We will study it in the next slide, or the role of the progesterone. Okay, so it is known as gestation hormone or the pregnancy hormone, and these hormones secreted from the corpus luteum. We already studied in the development of ovary as well as in the tears of ovary what is corpus luteum. After emptying the Graafian follicle, that is the release of ovum from the Graafian follicle, the empty Graafian follicle converted into corpus luteum. Okay, and these corpus luteum secretes the hormone progesterone. If released ovum fertilized with the sperm, okay, see here, what is here sentence? When the released ovum fertilized with the sperm, that is fuses with the sperm, then and then only corpus luteum becomes active. Otherwise, if fertilization do not take place, corpus luteum deteriorates in the another structure, that is corpus albicans. See here, one more. Regulation of the menstrual cycle by gonadotropins and ovarian hormones. FSH, LH, follicular stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. These two gonadotropin hormones secreted from the anterior pituitary gland. Estrogen from the ovarian follicles, progesterone from the corpus luteum. These hormones also regulate the menstrual cycle. Now, menstrual cycle, the period of menstrual cycle is about 28 days. It occurs per month in the female. But when? In child stage, in baby stage, or in adult stage? On puberty age. I already told what is puberty. It is a reproductive age. At this age, what happens? Menstrual cycle begins, hormonal changes take place, ovary becomes mature, and the age of puberty in case of girl, that is 10 to 14 years. There are 4 stages of menstrual cycle. These 28 days or 26 days, in some female the duration may be 26, in some 27, in some 28 days. 26 to 28 days, that is the menstrual cycle which occurs per month. There are 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. Menstrual phase or the bleeding phase, because during this phase bleeding takes place. Follicular phase, it is also known as proliferative phase. In the next slide I told about this, I must told about this follicular phase. Why it is known as follicular? Because it helps in the development of follicles. Okay, primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, mature up to graphium follicle development, that is follicular phase. Third one, ovulatory phase. The name indicates that during this phase, ovulation occurs. Ovulation, that is release of ovum from the ovary, that is ovulatory phase. And last most, luteal phase. Okay, here corpus luteum plays an important role in the secretion of progesterone. As well as this phase is also known as secretory phase, because here secretion of the endometrial glands takes place. So it is known as luteal phase or the secretory phase. Now next, see here, next page. First we for simplify study, I have given here the table for your easy study. For MCQ or for one answer sentence, you must know the duration of the cycle of each phase. Out of 20 days, first to fifth day, that is 5 days, is the menstrual phase. During these 5 days, what happens in female human being? Bleeding takes place in the uterus and discharge of the blood takes place through the vagina. 5 days takes place. Okay. Then follicular phase, after bleeding stop from 5th to 13th day. Okay. What happens during this day? The endometrium of the uterus rupture, due to which bleeding occurs, it gets recovered. And that phase is the follicular phase, and it is about 6 days. Remember, 6 days. Ovulatory phase, it occurs only on one day, 14th day. If suppose in some girls, okay, if the bleeding takes place on 1st October, then ovulation takes place on 14th October. Okay, bleeding takes place on 5 days and ovulation takes place on 14th day. Last most, luteal phase. It is the longest phase. It takes place from after release of the ovum. It takes place luteal phase, that is from 15 to 28th day. Longest phase, 14 days. Now count all these days, that is total 26 or 28 days. You must note down menstrual phase duration 5 days, 1st to 5th, follicular phase 5th to 13th, that is total 6 days, ovulatory phase 14th day, only 1 day, and luteal phase 15 to 28th day, that is 14 days. This is the diagram of the hormones and menstrual cycle. This diagram is also in the board textbook. First 5 days, that is menstrual phase or bleeding phase. 5 to 13 days, proliferatory phase or the follicular phase. And only 1 day, 14th day, that is ovulatory phase. And the last most, that is luteal phase, which is 15 to 28 day, 14 days. Menstrual phase. See, menstrual phase is also known as the bleeding phase, because during this phase what happens? Bleeding occurs. Why bleeding occurs? Because endometrium, the inner wall of the uterus, breaks, due to which blood vessel get ruptured and bleeding takes place. But why such happens? Is any factor which stimulate this breaking? Yes. Okay, see here in the name. The duration of this menstrual phase already studied in table number 1. 5 days, average 3 to 7 days. The beginning of each cycle taken as the first day, where the menses or loss of blood. The loss of blood is also known as menses, also known as menstruum. Okay, how much amount of blood loss takes place during these 5 days? 45 to 100 ml blood loss takes place. So girls should take care, okay, about their health. There is a role of hormones during this phase, in each phase, not only menstrual phase, in follicular phase, in luteal phase, in ovulatory phase, all these 4 phases, there is a role of hormone. There is a change in uterus, that is known as uterine cycle. Change in ovary, known as ovarian cycle. You must point out 3 points. Effect of hormones, always you write in exam. Okay, First point, effect of hormones, change in uterus and change in ovary. Okay. Effect of hormones. What happens during this phase? Progesterone, estrogen level decreases. We already studied these are the ovarian hormones. Progesterone secreted from the corpus luteum and estrogen secreted from the ovarian follicles. Both these are known as female sex hormones. Okay, they are secreted from the ovary. These hormones get decreases, and these hormones are essential for maintaining the thickness of the endometrium of the uterus. So what happens if these hormones get decreased? Automatic endometrium thickness becomes less and it get ruptured. And this endometrium is a vascular. It contains endometrial glands, blood vessels. Okay, so blood vessel get ruptured because of less amount of progesterone, estrogen. Along with this progesterone, prostaglandin hormone released. So what happens due to prostaglandins? Endometrium breaks down under the influence of prostaglandin. So bleeding occurs. Okay, you should remember. Menstrual phase is also known as bleeding phase. Duration 5 days, 1st to 5th day. 45 to 100 ml blood loss or the menses passes out through the vagina. Effect hormone, progesterone, estrogen hormone level decreases, prostaglandin release. So what happens due to this? Changes occurs in the uterus. Due to prostaglandins, endometrium breaks. See you. Diagram, menstrual phase. Here, this one is the endometrium lining of the uterus. Uterine cycle, changes in uterus. This is the endometrium which contains the blood vessels as well as endometrial glands. Menses, that is blood flow. Okay, what happens? Estrogen level decreases as well as progesterone hormone level decreases, which are essential for maintaining the thickness of the endometrium. But due to less secretion, endometrium ruptures and bleeding takes place in the uterus. Here, bleeding takes place. Endometrium get ruptured. So, bleeding occurs. Estrogen. One more question. Why the menstrual blood does not clot after the discharge through the vagina? We know if the finger cut, blood clot within 2 to 8 minutes. Okay, we will study blood clotting process in the circulation topic. Then why here not such happens about the menstrual blood? Why the menstrual blood flow does not clot after discharge to the vagina? Because of the one factor, fibrinolysin. Menstrual blood does not clot due to presence of fibrinolysin. You must write down answer. Menstrual blood does not clot due to presence of fibrinolysin. Now changes in the ovarian cycle. We study effect of hormones. We discuss about the uterine cycle, changes in uterus. And now changes in the ovary. Which changes are found in the ovary during this bleeding phase, menstrual phase? See here. FSH hormone starts secreting. Beginning of the secretion of the FSH. Estrogen level decreases, progesterone level decreases, but FSH secretion from the pituitary gland starts secreting. So it stimulates the development of the follicles. Primary follicle develop into secondary follicle. Here, ovarian cycle. Primary, secondary, up to the Graafian follicle. You carefully observe this diagram. Next point, changes in uterus. Okay, some points about the changes in uterus. First one, that is endometrium breaks. Okay, due to which blood, tissue fluid, unfertilized ovum get discharged through the vagina. One more thing happens, that is endometrial lining becomes very thin, about 1 millimeter. Thickness becomes less, 1 millimeter thin. The menstrual discharge continues for an average of 5 days. 5 days bleeding takes place. Changes in ovary. Many primary follicles develop into primary and few of them develop into secondary follicle under the influence of FSH hormone. FSH stimulates this development. Menstrual phase occurs only and only when egg does not fertilize with the sperm. Okay, mention this point carefully. Menstrual phase or the bleeding phase occurs only and only when ovulated egg. What is ovulated egg? That is the release of the egg from the ovary. Ovulated egg does not get fertilized and it is thereby shed, discharged out with the menstruum. Menstruum means with blood. Therefore, it is also described as, in your board textbook, there is a sentence, funeral of unfertilized egg, that is crying for the egg. We know that if some person dead, then their relatives, some neighbors cry for that person. Okay, such thing happen here also. Uterus crying for the discharge of this egg, dead egg. That is the meaning, funeral of unfertilized egg. Follicular phase. Before this, we again come to the point. Stages. Menstrual phase. What happens in menstrual phase? It takes place 5 days. It is also known as bleeding phase. During this phase, effect of, you must write down, effect of hormones, changes in uterus and changes in ovary. During menstrual phase, progesterone, estrogen level decreases. So what happens? Endometrium gets ruptured, bleeding takes place along with this blood, unfertilized ovum, mucus, blood, tissue fluid, ruptured endometrial tissue, all these get discharged through the vagina. Okay, these are the changes takes place in uterus. So what happens due to this? Endometrium becomes thin, 1 millimeter. And changes in the ovary, FSH starts secreting. Okay, and these FSH carried out the development of the ovarian follicles, primary, secondary follicle. Now next most, that is follicular phase. It is also known as proliferative phase. See here in this diagram. What happens during this phase? Follicular, the name indicates that the development of the follicle. Already in menstrual phase, the FSH start begin. Now the level of the FSH increases during this follicular phase. And one more interesting point, that FSH stimulates the ovarian follicles to secrete estrogen hormone. Estrogen, progesterone not directly secreted from the ovary. Okay, FSH secreted from the anterior pituitary gland, circulated through blood, come to the ovary of the female. In ovary, they stimulate the ovarian follicles and they give the signal to the ovarian follicles to secrete what? Estrogen hormone. Okay. Similarly, when progesterone secreted, luteinizing hormone, which is also secreted from the anterior pituitary gland, come through the circulation, blood circulation up to the ovary. In ovary, they stimulate the corpus luteum. Okay. They rupture the first Graafian follicle, release the ovum, and convert this Graafian follicle into corpus luteum and stimulate the corpus luteum to secrete what? Progesterone hormone. See here. During this phase, what happens? Here, FSH increases, secretion. So due to which what happens? Changes in the ovarian as well as uterus also takes place. Proliferative phase. Why it is known as proliferative? See here, tissue, endometrial tissue get proliferated. Here, see here, proliferative phase, which is about 5 to 13 days. Okay, 6 days this phase occurs. During this phase, endometrium start repairing. Blood vessel, new blood vessels form, endometrial glands get formed. This endometrial gland also known as uterine glands, because endometrium is the part, it is the inner wall of the uterus, so it is also known as the uterine gland. They again regenerate. Okay, that is generation, that is formation. Regenerate So here regeneration takes place, proliferation of the tissue takes place. So this phase is known as proliferative phase. Why such happens? Because FSH increases and FSH stimulates ovarian follicles to secrete estrogen, and estrogen carried out the repairing of the endometrium. They build up the endometrium. So this hormone is also known as repairing hormone. Estrogen is also known as repairing hormone. This endometrium which get ruptured in menstrual phase, now in proliferative phase, it get built up, it get regenerated, it get repaired by the estrogen hormone. So the estrogen hormone is known as repairing hormone. And when estrogen secreted, it is secreted under the influence of FSH. Now what are the changes? See here in diagram, uterus. In menstrual phase, it is 1 millimeter thin. This one is the uterus part, endometrial wall. Now it becomes, due to repairing, what happens? Thickness increases. It becomes 3 to 5 millimeter thick because of the estrogen. Estrogen maintains the thickness of the endometrium, as well as progesterone also play an important role in maintaining the thickness of the endometrium. Okay, here estrogen repairing the endometrium. So the from 1 millimeter to endometrium becomes 3 to 5 millimeter thick. That change takes place in follicular phase. Here one estrogen level increases, FSH, estrogen, and change in the endometrium, regeneration. See here, changes in uterus. Endometrial lining becomes very thin. Already we studied in menstrual phase. So in next page, the description is that follicular phase. This phase is the duration between the end of the menstruation, bleeding phase, and release of ovum, up to the release of ovum. In this period between these two phases, that is follicular phase. The duration of this follicular phase already we studied in tabular form, 5th to 13th day, that is 6th day. Effect of hormones. Gonadotrophic hormone, gonadotrophic releasing hormone from the pituitary gland stimulates the release of FSH, follicular stimulating hormone, and releasing, and this FSH increasing the level of estrogen. Changes in uterus. Regeneration of the endometrium takes place. Why? Due to increasing level of estrogen. It involves the formation of endothelial cells, endometrial or uterine glands, and network of blood vessels. So here we discuss about the endometrium also. Endometrium is a vascular, and it is also glandular because it contains uterine glands or the endometrium glands. Thickness of the endometrium becomes 3 to 5 millimeter, and in menstrual phase 1 millimeter thin. Changes in ovary. A few secondary follicles proceed to develop, but usually only one of them develops into Graafian follicle. Out of these many secondary follicles, only one Graafian follicle developed from the secondary follicle, but alternately, not simultaneously. If in 1 month from the left ovary Graafian follicle is formed, in the next month from the right ovary Graafian follicle is formed. The other secondary follicles undergoes atresia. The remaining, only one secondary follicle develop into Graafian follicle. Then what about the remaining secondary follicles? They undergoes atresia. That is the large destruction of the secondary follicles. Developing secondary follicles secrete the estrogen hormones. I already told estrogen hormones secreted from the ovarian follicles. The proliferation of the new follicles is influenced by the FSH. FSH stimulates the formation of or the proliferation of the ovarian follicles. Primary follicle, secondary follicle, and mature or Graafian follicle. And then emptying the Graafian follicle, release of ovum. Up to this is the follicular phase. Next most, that is the ovulatory phase. Ovulatory phase. What happens during during this ovulatory phase. The name indicates that ovulation process takes place. What is ovulation? Release of ovum or the egg from the ovary in the abdominal cavity. That is known as ovulation. When ovum is released, when Graafian follicle get ruptured. When Graafian follicle ruptured, when LH stimulates the Graafian follicle. LH breaks the Graafian follicle. From where LH secreted? It is secreted from the anterior pituitary gland. This LH secreted from the anterior pituitary gland acts on the Graafian follicle, breaks the Graafian follicle, and the ovum is released from the ovary. That process is known as the ovulation. And then it converts the empty Graafian follicle into yellowish body, that is corpus luteum. See here in the diagram, primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, up to development mature or Graafian follicle. Up to this, no doubt, follicular phase. But in ovulatory phase, what happens? Mature or Graafian follicle get burst due to LH, and the ovum release, that is known as ovulated ovum, which occurs on 14th day. The first day, that is the bleeding phase. The first day from which bleeding start, that is considered first day. On 14th day, from first day to 14th day, on 14th day, only one day, that is ovum is released from the ruptured Graafian follicle. See in the diagram, ovulated ovum. Here, menstrual phase, 5 days, progesterone, estrogen, hormone level decreases, endometrium ruptures, 1 millimeter thin, FSH starts to secrete, okay, follicular development starts, bleeding occurs, 45 to 100 ml blood loss takes place. Follicular phase, during this phase, repairing or the regeneration of the endometrium takes place. FSH level increases, which stimulates the secretion of estrogen, and estrogen carried out the regeneration, proliferation of the endometrium during this follicular phase. So endometrium becomes thick, 3 to 5 millimeter. Now ovulatory phase, we already see in the diagram ovulatory phase. Okay, see here, ovulated ovum. The points here, changes in ovary. I am discussing about the changes in ovary, ovarian cycle. In ovulatory phase, what happens? Changes in ovary is the most important. A few secondary follicles already we studied. Okay, see here, what happens during ovulatory phase? These are already points we discussed in follicular phase. It is the shortest phase. Must note down, shortest phase of the menstrual cycle, and usually occurs on 14th day of the menstrual cycle. It involves the process of ovulation. I already told about the ovulation. What is ovulation? Ovulation is the process or release of an ovum or the egg into the abdominal cavity by the rupture of mature Graafian follicle. What hormones show here effect? Sudden rise in the level of LH. In menstrual phase, decrease in the progesterone, estrogen. In follicular phase, FSH start, estrogen level increases. But in case of ovulatory phase, on 14th day, what happens? There is a sudden rise in the level of luteal and hormone. These hormones secreted from the anterior pituitary gland. So due to this LH, what happens? There are changes takes place in ovary. This LH rupture the Graafian follicle and stimulates the ovulation. Ovulation may be accompanied by mild or severe pain in the lower abdomen. In some female human being, there may be mild or severe pain in the lower abdomen. Last most, that is luteal phase. See here, it is the longest phase. Okay, it is the longest phase. It is about 14 days. Total 14 days it takes place. What happens during this phase? Reverse than the menstrual phase. In menstrual phase, what happens? Progesterone level decreases, but here progesterone level increases and some amount of estrogen also gets secreted. Okay, see here. Now 3 to 5 millimeter thick in case of follicular phase. In ovulatory phase, only we see that change in the ovary, not uterine cycle. in ovulatory phase, only write down the effect of hormones and change in the ovary. And in remaining 3 phases, you must write down 3 points: effect hormones, change in the ovary, change in the uterus. In follicular phase, it is about 3 to 5 millimeter thick, no doubt. In ovulatory phase, it is also same. What happens about this thickness? Due to secretion of the progesterone level increases, so it increases the thickness of the endometrium. Now see here in the diagram, thickness increases. Now it becomes 8 to 10 millimeter thick, and it is most important if the fertilization takes place. Okay, then zygote is formed after fusion of the sperm and the ovum, and this zygote further undergoes development from the blastocyst. We will study in the next lecture. And for the implantation of the blastocyst or the embryo, the uterus thickness must be essential. If it becomes thin, it is not get well implanted in case of embryo. Okay, so this thickness is essential for the implantation of embryo, birth of the baby. Implantation, that is the attachment of the embryo to the uterine wall, inner uterine wall, that is endometrium. Now the thickness in case of luteal phase, it is about 8 to 10 millimeter thick. See in the diagram what happens. Corpus luteum, if fertilization takes place, corpus luteum become active. It secretes progesterone, and this progesterone level increases, and it increases the thickness of the endometrium about 8 to 10 millimeter. Not only these changes takes place in uterus, it also takes place in the ovary also. What happens in ovary during this phase? It is the longest phase. See here, ovulated ovum. In ovulation, the ovum which get released, if this ovum get fertilized with the sperm, then corpus luteum becomes active. Empty Graafian follicle converted into corpus luteum. Corpus luteum becomes active, start to secreting progesterone hormone, and this progesterone hormone increases the thickness of endometrium. If fertilization do not occur, see here, if fertilization do not occur, corpus luteum get degenerated into white scar, that is corpus albicans. If fertilization takes place, it becomes active. If fertilization do not take place, it converted into corpus albicans. See here, luteal phase, description of the luteal phase. Secretory or luteal phase. This phase is the duration between the ovulation, that is release of ovum, and beginning of the next menses, bleeding phase. This is the longest phase, which lasts for 14 days from 15 to 28 days of the cycle. Effect of hormones, beginning of the secretion of progesterone level increases, small amount of estrogen, and one more hormone, inhibin, secreted from the corpus luteum. This inhibin stops the secretion of FSH. There is no essentiality of this FSH for the follicular development. Okay, so to stop the secretion of the FSH, inhibin secreted from the corpus luteum. So what happens in the uterus due to these hormone changes? Endometrial glands grow, becomes coiled, and start uterine secretion, uterine milk. We will study in the next lecture in the development, embryonic development. Uterine milk provides the nutrients to the developing baby inside the pregnant woman. Endometrium becomes more vascular, blood vessels are formed, and its thickness reaches up to 8 to 10 millimeter. These changes are necessary for fertilization and subsequent implantation. I already told why thickness is necessary for fertilization as well as for the implantation. Human chorionic gonadotrophy, one more hormone secreted when ovulated egg gets fertilized with the sperm. Okay, human chorionic gonadotrophy. Why it is known as human chorionic? Okay, when pregnant woman is a 3rd month pregnancy, At the end of the 3rd month pregnancy, placenta, an intimate connection between the mother and fetus, through which nutrition, oxygen, antibodies, hormones get provided to the fetus, as well as metabolic waste, carbon dioxide, urea get transported from fetus to the mother. Okay, but there is no mixing of the both circulation, mother circulation and fetus circulation. It is a reddish brown disc, this placenta. Where it is formed? It is formed by the end of the 3rd month of pregnancy. This human chorionic gonadotrophic hormone secreted from the chorionic, so the name is human chorionic gonadotrophic hormone, secreted when ovulated egg gets fertilized with the sperm and resulted embryo is implanted. Okay, this hormone, if suppose get detected in the blood or the urine of that woman, then it indicates she is pregnant. This hormone extends the life of corpus luteum. Extends the life of corpus luteum. If suppose this hormone is less, it is not secreted in sufficient amount, then corpus luteum is not functional. Maybe abortion takes place. This hormone extends the life of corpus luteum and stimulates its secretory activity. In board, maybe there is question about the human chorionic gonadotrophy. For one answer sentence, write down the long form of the human chorionic gonadotrophy. Long form, human chorionic gonadotrophy. Okay, if this hormone is detected in the blood or urine of the woman, then it marks the pregnancy. In the absence of fertilization, next menstrual cycle begins. If fertilization do not take place, menstrual cycle, bleeding phase again start. Changes in ovary. During this luteal phase, what happens? After release an ovum, remaining tissue of the Graafian follicle transferred into corpus luteum under the influence of LH, luteinizing hormone, which rupture the Graafian follicle and convert it into corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is a temporary endocrine part. Okay. Luteal phase. Changes in ovary. Another changes. The ovulated egg may be fertilized within 24 hours. If ovulated egg, that is released egg from the ovary, may be fertilized within 24 hours after sexual intercourse, then and then only corpus luteum becomes active. However, in the absence of fertilization, corpus luteum can survive for only 2 weeks. Here, in absence of fertilization, corpus luteum can survive only for 2 weeks and then degenerate. If fertilization do not take place, then degenerate into white scar called corpus albicans. Here, corpus albicans. If fertilization takes place, see here in the diagram, sperm, male gamete, female gamete, that is ovum, which is released from the Graafian follicle, that is ovulated ovum. If this ovulated ovum within 24 hours get fused with the sperm, fertilization process occurs and the zygote formation takes place. That is the change in the ovary. Now, see here, for our easy study, I give comparative tables. Already we discussed table number 1 about the duration, menstrual phase about 5 days, 1st to 5th day. Okay, follicular phase 5th to 13th days, 6 days. Ovulatory phase only 1 day. Okay, that is 14th day, and the longest phase of this menstrual cycle, that is the luteal phase or the secretory phase, which occurs from 15th to 28 days. That is 14 days, total 26 to 28 days. Now, effect of hormones in each phase. For easy study, I have given here the comparative points in tabular form. Menstrual phase, what happens? Progesterone estrogen level decreases, prostaglandin release. Follicular phase, FSH hormone start secreting and it increases the level of estrogen. It is a repairing hormone. Ovulatory phase, sudden rise in the level of luteinizing hormone. And luteal phase, beginning of the secretion of the progesterone, small amount of estrogen and inhibin from the corpus luteum, which the name indicates it inhibits the secretion of FSH. So the name is inhibin. Here the diagram. In menstrual phase, decrease the level of estrogen and progesterone. Okay, in follicular phase, proliferative phase, what happens? FSH level increases, estrogen level increases, FSH level increases, estrogen level increases. Sudden rise in LH during ovulatory phase. Here on 14th day, sudden rise in the luteinizing hormone and beginning of the secretion of the progesterone, rise in the level of the progesterone and small amount of estrogen during the luteal phase. All these about the effect of hormones during each phase. Next table, changes in uterus. What changes occurs during each phase in the uterus? In menstrual phase or the bleeding phase, endometrium rupture and becomes 1 millimeter thin. In follicular phase, regeneration, repairing of the endometrium takes place. So what happens? It becomes 3 to 5 millimeter thick. In ovulatory phase, no change, same as it is in follicular phase. Luteal phase, endometrium becomes vascular, more vascular. Already it is vascular in follicular phase, but more vascular and thickens about 8 to 10 millimeter. Endometrium glands grow and start secreting uterine milk, uterine secretion. So this luteal phase is also known as secretory phase. In the diagram C, what happens? In menstrual phase, what happens? Endometrium ruptures 1 millimeter thick. In proliferative phase, repairing, it becomes 3 to 5 millimeter thick. In ovulatory phase, as it is. And in last most luteal phase, what happens? Endometrium thickness becomes 8 to 10 millimeter. Endometrium glands becomes coiled and start secretion uterine milk. Last tabular form, changes in ovary. In each phase, what changes takes place in ovary? In menstrual phase, ovulated egg, that is released egg, get shed along with the menstruation. Along with the menses, along with the blood, this ovum get discharged through the vagina. During follicular phase, development of Graafian follicle takes place in the ovary from primary, then from few primary follicles develop into secondary, and only one secondary follicle develop into Graafian follicle or mature follicle, and remaining secondary follicles get destroyed. Okay, undergoes atresia. Ovulatory phase. In ovulatory phase, what happens? Ovulation occurs, that is luteinizing hormone rupture the Graafian follicle and release ovum from the ovary into the abdominal cavity, and remaining Graafian follicle get converted into corpus luteum. Luteal phase. Here Graafian follicle converted into corpus luteum. If fertilization takes place, it becomes active and starts secreting progesterone. If fertilization do not takes place during this phase, what happens? Corpus luteum get converted into white scar, that is corpus albicans. See in the diagram, changes in the ovary, this second most ovarian cycle. What happens? Menstrual phase, ovulated egg get shed along with the menstruum. Then Graafian follicles develop up primary to up to Graafian follicle development in follicular phase. Ovulatory phase, release of the ovum from the Graafian follicle. And luteal phase, what happens? Corpus luteum is formed from the Graafian follicle. If fertilization takes place, it becomes active. If not takes place, then it converts into corpus albicans. All these are the changes takes place during menstrual cycle. Okay, thank you.